Did that do it? Did that work? I think that worked. Hello? Oh, wait, I muted you. I muted you. Okay, you're no longer muted. Hello. Someone in chat,
Let's
tell
see.
us that we sound great, please. Or if we don't sound
I'm
great, please
refreshing.
don't lie. And please tell us if the levels are good, etc. Because we don't do this very often, so we are not
I
streaming
don't see
pros.
us yet. Oh, there we are. Okay. Yes.
Okay,
All right, we're good.
so people will be responding shortly as I monitor
Mm-hmm.
the chat awkwardly here in the future. Everyone's saying it sounds good. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Hi,
All right, I have
everyone.
to pop out the chat.
Pop out the chat. Good. Pump up the jams, pop out the chat, as we say around here.
Yeah, that's the thing we say around
Yeah,
here.
that's our
For
catchphrase.
sure.
Yeah.
Frank, where's your party hat?
I don't have a party hat.
Yeah.
I brought a pin, but I don't know where I put it.
I brought so many party hats, but nobody showed up.
You didn't give me one.
I didn't mail you a $1.50 pack of 10 party hats. I
You
got at
did
Target
not. You
this
did
year.
not. No. I do have the company's Bubsy mug here, which is a party in itself. Our mascot is here overlooking us, and I think we're ready to go. Hey everyone! Oh, there's another Frank in the chat. Hi, Frank M. Hey everyone! Thank you for joining us on our 4th birthday of the Video Game History Foundation. My name is Frank Cifaldi, which most of you probably know that already, but I'm the founder and the co-director of the Video Game History Foundation, and here with me is my partner Kelsey.
Hi. Yeah, that's me. I'm Kelsey Lewin, which you guys might also know, I assume. And I am not the founder, but I am the co-director, and I've been, I don't know, I started bothering you very seriously, like maybe 1 month into the
Yeah,
foundation being a thing.
that's true.
So took a little bit longer than that for me to like keep doing anything, but I've been bothering you for a long time.
Yeah. So Kelsey was when we launched this thing 4 years ago today. I mean, she wasn't immediately there, but within weeks, maybe the first month, she was all sliding into my DMs, asking how to be involved. And I guess it took me like 2.5 years to actually be like, oh wait, you're serious?
No,
How long
two
was
and a
it?
half.
Yeah.
Like no, because it was
Well, I was
the
thinking
first
Minneapolis,
TRGE
but
we
I
did.
guess you're right. Of course, we did stuff together before that. Of course, you weren't. We
Yeah,
didn't call you the co-director, but yes,
no, that took probably a year and a half or so. But
yeah. But
yeah,
but Kelsey's been around since the beginning. Just in case she's new for any of you watching, she slowly pestered me into into her current role as voluntary co-director. A nice unpaid role for you.
yeah, that's
Um,
awesome.
so yeah, I mean, as you can probably tell, we didn't really have a lot like set up for this or anything. It's just kind of a very casual celebratory stream. If
You've never done a Patreon stream, as far as I know, right?
No, I mean we do have like a monthly stream for like the higher tiers for people who are 25 and up, but we've never done a live stream that's just for every backer, which is a little messed up. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's why we wanted to do this, really, I mean, not that we're like obsessed with our own birthdays, but more so that I don't know, want a chance to like talk to all of you guys and talk about
Mhm.
how things have changed over 4 years and get feedback and questions. And I don't know, for some of you guys, literally meet some of you for the first time
Yeah.
because you've just been donating and supporting and making this whole thing run, keeping the lights on. And I haven't even met some of you, so yeah.
So, we're going to be super casual, just kind of talk about what the last 4 years have been, kind of go through like the evolution of the thing, and sort of where our thoughts were in the past and like maybe some of the ideas that didn't work. But Also, this is super casual, and we are taking questions. Please just like bombard us in the chat if you need to. We are monitoring it, but also Robin Kunamune, who is our director of programs, is in the chat moderating and will be collating those questions for us if we miss them. But yeah, I don't know. Should I just kind of start at the beginning with this?
Sure. Yeah.
So I personally have been involved with preserving video game history in one form or another since, I don't know, since I kind of first got the internet, maybe 98, 99, something like that. And that kind of started from a place of ROM dumping. So meaning like finding the cartridge games, that you couldn't get the ROMs of on the internet and making sure that they were digitized and that people could access them. And back then it was like there were still like retail games for the NES that you couldn't download yet. It was still kind of the Wild West. But that really got me thinking more seriously about like, well, what else is it that might be lost with video games. And I started a website with a group of friends who were like-minded in 2003 called Lost Levels. And that website was, as far as I knew at the time, and I still think it's true, the first website that was specifically dedicated to talking about unreleased games that didn't come out. So we would track those down and, maybe work with collectors to sort of like get files from them, usually costing us thousands of dollars, or talk to the developers who made these things and sort of get their stories documented and stuff like that. And in doing so, I kind of started taking this notion of video game preservation more seriously, as far as like just questioning like, well, what's really volatile here? What's actually going to disappear if we don't go out and grab it? And like I said, we were documenting people's stories. So that sort of, almost accidentally created my career as a video game journalist, because I was, doing that work and editing a website, and editors took notice. And so that kind of got my door in the industry through Simon Carless, who's now on our board, actually. My first full-time job, was editing what did I do? I think I was the news editor at first at gamasutra.com. So kind of, industry career started there around 2004, something like that. Freelance writing, bounced around the industry. I worked for a company called GameTap for a little while, which did like games on demand, subscription-based stuff. The thing that like Xbox does now, except we were doing it in 2006 or whatever on computers. And I, kept doing journalism for sites like 1UP. I was an editor there for a while. Went back to Gamasutra, wrote for magazines, things like that. Got into game development, and throughout all of this, I don't know, like my personal perspective was that the preservation work that I did, then it was still doing, but just not as rapidly during all that. To me, that was like first, and the video game career that I had never necessarily aspired to was like how I stayed close enough to video games to do that, which I thought was, the real work. Oh, hey, Simon is in chat. Hey, Simon. Thank you for giving me a job, Simon. 15 years ago, 17 years ago. Wow. And so like, even working at Gamasutra, 1UP, etc., I'd sort of start veering toward the more like historical articles and talking to older developers, things like that. In my game development career, ended up working on classic game compilations. I directed at Digital Eclipse Mega Man Legacy Collection, which was like this package that did all 6 of the NES Mega Man games and sort of contextualized them with behind the scenes stuff and concept art and whatever I could get Capcom marketing to send us. Basically, I threw in the game. or that I could scan from magazines, things like that. And but really, like I said, the preservation stuff just kept sneaking its way into my career, and after a while, it's just like I need to just do only this, instead of just having day jobs that are tangentially related to this. It's like it had been 15 plus years, and the passion had not gone away, and preserving the stuff is all I ever wanted to do. And so, fortunately, my life situation was one where I could step away from full-time work and do this on a voluntary basis for a while. And with the encouragement of my wife Amanda, who is the breadwinner in the family, left my game development career mostly behind to start the Video Game History Foundation, which is something that had been on my mind, for years prior to that. Just the idea of starting a charity for this sort of thing. If you watched the Patreon pitch video before signing up, I assume most of you did, but you can see that the way I kind of describe it is that there just hadn't really been, a dedicated foundational nonprofit outside of just kind of like museums that was dedicated to solving the issues of preserving video game history. And so, I started one and got together a board that includes people like Simon, who I mentioned, and Mike Micah from Other Ocean, Chris Melsinos, who I had worked with on Smithsonian's Art of Video Games exhibit years ago, and Steve Lynn, a good friend of ours who, works at Discord and was one of the craziest collectors of interesting video game memorabilia to ever have been, and got this thing rolling. And when I launched 4 years ago, we had some idea of what this thing would be, but something that I never was shy about was not knowing what this thing should be, what a Video Game History Foundation is. And so, it's really you all that allowed us to figure this out, because it was that monthly Patreon income over these last 4 years that could essentially keep the lights on, and could, it combined with like the volunteer work that me and later Kelsey are able to put into this, the funding that was coming in made it so that we could do things like pay for our storage, pay for our office space. We have a very small office space that I'm in right now. Expand our library collection, because that's something that's really important to us, is capturing a video game history library for people to use, and sort of figure out what it is that's needed in the world, and target that, because that has evolved over time. Kelsey, I've been talking a lot. Do you want to sort of go through our notes here?
Yeah, you're starting at the beginning there, which really is your life story up until 4 years ago, is what led you to making this thing. And as you were just about to start talking about, it looks pretty different, I think, after 4 years than what it sort of conceptually was at the beginning. We really didn't have a good mission statement nailed down, which is like the first thing you're supposed to do as a nonprofit, by the way. We didn't really have that, so.
To my defense, again, what I said was that when we started, I said, I don't know what this needs to be. We're going to figure it out.
Of course. I think that even if you had a really solid one at the beginning, I still think it would have
changed. Because absolutely.
The nature of having 4 years to sit with this and, devote full-time energy to figuring out what exactly it is that the world needs from a Video Game History Foundation. So I went ahead and I captured like how the mission statement has evolved over the last 4 years, and the one that you had at the very beginning on the website was oh, knocking my computer over. Sorry. The Video Game History Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to cataloging, digitizing, and preserving the history of video games. So, how much cataloging have we done in 4 years?
Yeah. Cataloging. I know we have at least 2 librarians or former librarians in chat right now. Cataloging is a job that
it's also like step 4 of the process.
Right.
Like,
well, okay, so to be clear, what I was thinking 4 years ago, and I still think this, but it's a longer term vision now as opposed to the focus, is that there needs to be a dedicated digital repository of video game history that sits somewhere in between the Internet Archive and like a traditional library, because there's a lot of material that donors, copyright owners who might donate things to us, etc., don't mind people studying, but they want some limitations on it. And so it still is our long-term goal to figure out how we occupy that space in between everything blasted online and everything, needing to be accessed physically on location. That's still our long-term vision, but yeah, 4 years ago, launching with that and, only me, like, and sort of not necessarily promising that product, but leading with that was, maybe not the best idea.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, we've done a ton of the preserving part, and we've actually done a ton of the digitizing part too.
We have.
But as we've learned as we go along, and especially as we realize, just how much 1.5 full-time people is in manpower, right? You have to start at the beginning and prioritize. I mean, there's a literally endless amount of things to do in the realm of video game preservation because it hasn't been done yet. Like we weren't ready to go when the video game industry came around with people doing this as we went. So we're not only trying to catch up with what's going on right now, but also on everything that's happened over the last 40, 50 plus years. So that's a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, cataloging, digitizing, preserving, those are all still things that fall under our scope.
But that was, so to be clear, that was our mission statement at launch. That's like, opening day of Disneyland when half the rides didn't work, sort of like version of the foundation at this point. But, it did evolve kind of quickly, I think, to that next one you wrote down. I'll let you read my clunky mission statement revision.
I actually still like this one. So we started in our talks when we started like giving presentations and doing more kind of advocacy and education and that sort of thing. We started using this phrase that was ensuring that storytellers have the tools they need to tell the stories of video games, which is still completely true. Everything we do is ensuring that if someone wants to talk about video game history, that they are equipped to do that.
Right.
It's just not very, it's just very nebulous sounding.
Yeah.
And it's not wrong.
Well, it's, through the whole thing, I mean, what it has always come down to is that we want to see better study of video game history. We want to see more books on shelves, right? We want to see more documentaries out there that do more than talk about the video game crash and Sega versus Nintendo or whatever. Like we want better stories, and we don't think that there's a lot of tools to tell those stories yet. And that's sort of what that statement was, right? To make sure the storytellers have the tools they need to tell the stories. That still is our mission.
Simon just said, yeah, of course. And just to kind of bounce off of what Simon Carlos just said in chat here, it also, I think, tried to illustrate that we're not just collecting video games.
Right.
And, you know, because there is a place for a physical archive of actual video games, but the good news is that's already been done a bunch of times.
Yeah.
So not something we felt we needed to focus on. We figured, I mean, I think you had that one figured out from day one.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, that was never on the question that we would be a collection of physical video games. A part of that
actually what drew me to this organization. If in case you didn't know that, I was like, oh, cool. Someone realizes that while there's absolutely a place for all of that, that's not, it doesn't fix the problem, and that's not the end of the story.
Well, it doesn't do anything.
When we have,
it doesn't do much.
We have all the games.
So
even if we had every single game,
it doesn't do much, because I also have every single video game because I have the internet. So, it's something that, I mean, that for me, I think just came from being a part of the video game collecting community for so long. And I think a lot of, what we tend to think of as like video game preservation institutions, or at least attempts at them, some of them have succeeded, many have not, have come from a place of games are important. We should collect the games and put them all in one place. And I always felt that, well, first of all, and I've said this a million times, that you don't understand a game by playing it. You get some parts of it.
If you got the box, you get a little bit more.
Right.
You get, the splash marketing that they're putting on the back of the box.
Right.
You get a little bit more than a ROM on the internet, but
as historians, we understand that it's like, well, you don't get the context for this game just by playing it. You don't understand, who made it, why they made it, who it was made for, how it was sold. You just don't get any of that. And if you're an historian, studying this game, yeah, the gameplay is going to give you a lot of that, but you're not going to tell its story without that other stuff. And that's why, that's why we're sort of focused on like figure out how tools get to storytellers, right? Like those tools being things like our, books and magazines. We have a large collection of that. I didn't even mention that I had started that collection in like 2000 or something, just as someone studying video game history for Lost Levels, etc. Like I needed magazines, and literally no public library had a good collection of video game magazines, let alone near me. So
they still don't.
No, they still don't. So then you have a third one here that sort of evolved from there that was in our pitch deck. I don't even remember this deck, but we've done so many of these.
Yeah, which was to preserve video game history by making it accessible to everyone. And, again, still part of what we do, just doesn't really capture the whole thing. We want anyone to be able to, I genuinely believe that anyone can be a historian if they have access to the right tools.
Yeah.
So we want people to have as much access to this information as possible, because if you can read all about the context of the time and look at developer documents and have access to all of these tools, you probably can tell a good story. Anyone can. So that, again, is still true. That's still part of the equation. It's just not quite all of it.
Right. And, it is our core belief, right, that anyone can be a video game historian. And I think that this medium in particular attracts a lot more curiosity than most others. And, I think the problem with that sort of mission statement, like making it accessible to everyone, it almost has a promise that can't be fulfilled, right? Where we're almost over promising that like we can build a thing that lets you grab anything.
We could suddenly make every developer on board with
right
letting you comb through their source code, and
that's
the future we want. But
right, but where it was more coming from was that by making it accessible to everyone, we meant more in the sense of making it easy. Like we want to create more video game historians. Essentially, is another way of putting what I think we were going for with that, right? And again, what we identified is that video game history is just not great right now. It's pretty good actually, but like it could be better, and we think that that's because of a lack of tools. And then nowadays when we finally sort of nailed down something to publish on the website essentially back in October. I'll let you read that. You've read all the other ones.
Sure. Okay, so the Video Game History Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to preserving, celebrating, and teaching the history of video games.
Yeah.
And I think it's always going to be difficult to define what exactly it is that we do. But I think this certainly comes the closest out of everything we've identified so far. The preserving part is always going to be huge. We have a lot of loss that's already happened, future loss we want to prevent. Like there's a lot of preserving aspect to it for sure. And then the teaching part, I think, kind of goes hand in hand with advocating for it. Like we're not just teaching people history, but we're teaching people that they can become historians, and that here's how you can use these tools. Here's what some of these tools look like, and here's the kind of stories you can get when you have access to these tools. So I think
it's more vague. It's more vague than any of our other ones. It really is, right? Like we're preserving, celebrating, and teaching the history of video games. All of that is true, but it isn't as laser focused on any particular initiative, because it's like, I mean, really what I think our purpose is identifying these problems that I think if they're not identified now, people won't start working on them for another 10 or 20 years, and like getting the groundwork going on it. So, the biggest example of that, I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but for example, we started what we called our what do we call it? The Source Initiative? We changed the name on this. I keep forgetting what we called
Source
it.
Project.
The Video Game Source Project. Because we feel that the source material generated when creating a game, the source code, the source art, the documentation, the internal correspondence, just the raw material that went into making a game, is the best. Having access to that is the best way to study that game, is our feeling. Because if you're able to look at the code, you sort of start to understand why some decisions were made. You understand, the limitations of the technology, and why Mario moves a certain way or whatever. And if you have things like studio correspondence, you understand where creators were coming from, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a controversial statement, right? That stuff is super important for study. And of course people want that, but I think that there hadn't really been like a call out for it, at least that I had seen, right? Like a concentrated call out to the importance of source material for the study of video games. And while we didn't have a solution for it, and again, so sorry, I should say there's problems with this, right? Because the source material is a trade secret to a lot of companies, right? And so that's a problem. Like we've identified that we need it, but it's a trade secret, but also that most of it has either disappeared or is in someone's garage on like floppy disks, right? So we started the Source Project just trying to get ahead. Well, I mean, it's already an issue. We've already lost a lot, but it's like we're trying to make people take that stuff more seriously now, because this industry is only getting older. People are aging out, and that's sort of an example of where I think we've evolved to fit into the world, is just figuring out these things that we're almost uniquely positioned to do, right? Because we live in the archival world, we live in the collector world, we live in the development world. I'm still a part of the game development community, and having those tentacles everywhere, just I think that's a unique thing for us, that some other organizations maybe couldn't do. And not to say that they should even, right? Like I wouldn't expect a traditional museum, for example, to also be within the development community. That doesn't make sense. It's a rare place to be in all three places. So that's kind of where I see us now, is just kind of occupying that space that touches all of the places and understands the problems of the future, and tries to, as we like to say, stop the bleeding as opposed to fix it.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of want to just go back to what we originally said that we were going to be doing versus what we've identified over
Mm-hmm.
the last 4 years that we are not only capable of doing, but best positioned to do. And that's obviously a really good example of one of them, because no single organization is going to be able to do all of it. Like, if this is a community of game preservation that we exist in, like a whole ecosystem. And there's not that many of us yet. So there are things that are just plain overscoped right now. So when we first started, I mean, we said a digital library, as we mentioned earlier, with all the collections accessible online. That is still 100% the goal. It just turns out that costs a lot of money and manpower.
Yeah.
Uh, a physical reference library, that's something we still have and are still doing. That's what Frank is sitting in right now.
I mean, I'm in a really messy part of it, but yeah, I mean, that's like 1/6 of it, I think.
We wanted to digitize and dump all of the things, which
So, okay, I want to talk to this, because I think,
okay.
that's kind of what I had in mind, and I think that anyone in game preservation, that's where we all start. And I think when I started this, it was like, hey, maybe if there's like a name to it, we can surface more things, and we could be the sort of trusted organization that you send your stuff to preserve. What I mean, it's almost embarrassing now to think back to thinking that way, because it's like there's so many people who can do this. There's there's so many specialists who know the equipment, know the formats. Like, I don't really know how a floppy disk works. I don't know how magnetic data streams are structured or anything like that. There's people out there who are way better than us at just taking the thing and making a physical copy of it. Digital copy of it. Not just from a technical perspective, but from a labor perspective. And so I've really shied away from that for the organization, because like it's labor, right? It's time, it's labor, it's brain bandwidth to like solve problems. And we still do a lot of, well, not a lot. We still digitize to an extent, but it tends to be, okay, for example, great example would be the archives of Chris Oberth, who was a game developer who passed away, unfortunately. But we worked with his family starting early last year to go through what remained of his material. And they actually entrusted us with things like, his hard drives, right? Like his old hard drive backups that had personal data and things like that. And like, that's the kind of thing where I think we are uniquely positioned to do that. I think it would have been really hard for his family to trust a lot of people with that information, and to be discreet about it, and to only take the video game parts out of it, right? And so, I would rather spend my time on stuff like that than, like a collector just found a prototype EEPROM cartridge, right? Like that, like there's so many people who can do that now. And so we've evolved to sort of start pushing that onto, other organizations like Gaming Alexandria or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that we don't do these things. We just, again, it's part of identifying where we can put our best and most important efforts
Yeah.
in, like the things that we are uniquely positioned to do, as opposed to things that, we know lots of people that can do and can do very well, and sometimes in some cases even do it better than us, because like you said, they understand the equipment better,
Yeah.
for some of these formats. um, we talked about doing some level of consulting for museums and libraries and figuring out where, um, where artifacts live best.
Oh
I
yeah, yeah,
think, I
yeah.
mean,
The way I always the shorthand I always said for this is like helping to be the traffic cop for
yeah,
video game material, right? Like, and we still do some of this. We don't really consult for museums and libraries, but um, when someone comes at us and they're like, "Hey, I have this thing that I think is important," um, we do tend to sort of like redirect that to what we think would be an appropriate home. Strong Museum, National Video Game
this
Museum,
goes hand
etc.
this goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about the point before, where it's like, if it doesn't live best with us, then we figure out where it does live best. And
Yeah,
um, I don't feel like that's something we focus on much anymore, but it's still sort of like a day-to-day operation, I
yeah.
guess. Um, the other thing, this is really cute. Uh, we would be giving out money for research grants, like a real foundation, which
Okay, actually, that's
I
not that's not far from the truth. It's not.
no, it's not,
So
because we actually have funded several
we funded
projects.
preservation projects. From I mean, there's really small examples. Like we have purchased rare video games for digitization for someone else to do. You know what I mean? Like something rare has come up on eBay, and we've been able to just kind of give someone a little bit of capital just to make it happen. So we've done a little bit of that. Um, we've purchased scanners for like retromags.com just to make sure that and I think we've also donated to their server costs, stuff like that. We give to historians a Patreon, from our own, like we sort of pass some of that forward, not a lot, but a little bit. And we've paid for magazines to get purchased and shipped to a scanner. So like we do some of that, but we don't do the traditional research grant thing yet, and that's just because we don't have any money. We don't. I can't pay someone, like I'm not paid yet, So actually, that's. I mean, I don't know. Is that an announcement we should make? Which is like,
Sure. Yeah,
my first paycheck's on the first, so
that's huge.
yeah. I have officially been hired as our minimum wage CEO. Um, and my first paycheck is on the first, and that actually came about, because of things like the Blind Box Magazine program and some other work that we've been doing. Anyway, next on the list of things we said we'd do that we didn't do.
Yeah, the next one was establishing archival standards for game companies, and trying to help game companies along in figuring out what to do with their own stuff. And again, there's very little of things on this list that we've completely abandoned. So it's not that we never give any advice or consultation on this, but it turns out that those companies tend to know their inner workings a lot better than than we do.
Yeah, this is something that Mike Micah on our board was kind of championing when we started, which is that there are no archival standards internally for game developers, and it's a tough problem that we're just not in a position to do because we don't make games. We don't have people on staff who are in that world right now. But what has been really good to see is that companies like EA have started talking about their processes. There was a talk at GDC, whenever the last real one was, 2019, from EA's archive team about like EA's way of archiving games and how they do it and encouraging others to do it. Of course, how they do it is they have paid archival staff. I don't think that works for most places.
They did break it down into, the low level version of it versus the really intricate levels. So I mean, what we do with this still is that we're still talking about it and that we're still sort of advocating for it and getting this and also showing these companies what can be done if you do, like, companies are always going to be motivated by money and resources because you need those things to run a company. You can't exist if you aren't getting income. So when they're figuring out where to allocate their resources and allocate their money, this tends to be pretty low on the priority list, unless we can do things like show them, hey, look, if someone has access to your source code, here's all of the things that we can pull out of it. You can re-release your game. Actually,
sure.
why don't you talk about the
I mean,
really big version
we're talking more about advocating for it than establishing standards at this point, right? Like advocating for the idea of not only saving your stuff but letting others add it. So I mean, a good example of that would be the content that we did around the 30th anniversary of The Secret of Monkey Island, which is depending when you ask me which day of the week is maybe my favorite game of all time. We had access to the source code for The Secret of Monkey Island, and I happen to have some level of communication with most of the people who worked on the game as well. Just from being in the industry all these years and being a fanboy at them at GDC or whatever. So we were able to look through the source code and document a lot of how the game was made and a lot of the ideas that were cut out, the deleted scenes and the creative process and stuff like that. And we published not only an article, but a video stream that I think a lot of you watched, where I had Ron Gilbert, the creator of the game, on with us, and we looked at the source code together, and I live demonstrated how the Scum scripting system worked, and we built it into the game and stuff like that. And that was not only sort of establishing a phrase we do like to say sometimes is like showing the receipts, right? Like we wanted to show what happens, right? Like if a game with that kind of following, if an historian has like inside access to it, what cool stuff happens. So that was a demonstration of that. We even worked a little bit with Lucasfilm on that. We let them know ahead of time what we wanted to do, wanted to see if they wanted to be involved, etc. I think I would like to think that it opened some doors maybe for the future, maybe not necessarily with us, but some doors in the future for companies like Lucasfilm or maybe even other companies to see what a good like marketing opportunity it is, to actually talk about games in a serious way. So yeah, that I mean, I think that proved it out. God, I worked so hard on this stupid thing.
So I mean that's already going into our other point on here, which is that we are still definitely advocating for preservation in a number of different ways. That's obviously one of the ways. I have on here, I don't actually really remember how this tied in the beginning, but teaching people how to be historians.
Yeah,
I think we did a couple. There's like a couple blog posts about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we thought we'd expand on more. We didn't end up doing it. We had this notion that it's not just the tools. It's like we should tell people how to use tools, right? So we had it looks like Kelsey froze. So we had this notion of having articles that sort of explain how to research video game history. We had one that explained how to search the Internet Archive, text archives, for example. But yeah, that's something that we didn't really follow up on too much. And then another sort of pillar that we've said that we do is, you know, we're small and flexible enough that like we can be the people who show up with the van if stuff goes down. And we've been doing that since the start. Prior to the foundation officially starting, actually, just we were able to rescue a lot of things from the offices of IDOS. We rescued a lot of material from Telltale when Telltale was going under, so we have a lot of their material. Unfortunately, not much of it being like source level. It tends to be more like, you know, their marketing materials and things like that, but it's still cool. So yeah, I mean, that's, you know, this is just an example of like how this idea of the foundation evolves, right? It's like we tried all these things. Some of it stuck, some of it didn't, but where we are right now is essentially, well, actually, Kelsey, you should probably take over because you're back now.
I'm back. Yeah. I think we've sort of talked about which of these things, like how we are still putting all of these in as part of what we do, right? Like which things have sort of fallen off and which things haven't. But I mean, in general, the most important things, I think, just sort of the step ones and the things that we're best positioned to do are the physical reference library, advocating for preservation because we have our sort of tentacles in so many different areas, and the actual preservation part, the saving stuff on site as we need to. So, you know, a lot of this came about because we had a ton of time to think about all of this in 2019 because we were living in Minneapolis for like 5+ weeks with a team of some of you guys who are in chat actually at Game Informer magazine, which I think most of you have probably heard about by now because we've talked about it quite a bit. But Game Informer has been around since 1991. They've basically never moved offices, and they were very thankfully kind of hoarders. So everything that a press outlet was sent from 1991 until now, physically, which really means that it kind of peters off around the early 2000s, but from 1991 until then, just still existed there. It existed in a closet. And so, I mean, this is the world's most complete and I mean, this is the only thing of this magnitude existing as far as I'm concerned. I can't even conceptualize of anything else, but it is a basically complete archive of everything that a media outlet would have seen for over a decade.
And I think it's important to point out here too, like because we were talking about how we are trying to figure out where we're uniquely positioned in the world and how we want to make sure that everything that we're doing, because our resources are so limited, are things that we don't think other people would do. And so I think the Game Informer project is like the prime example of that, where we have this magazine that has all this stuff that they still want to maintain, right? They want to keep the stuff. They can't donate it. But they understand its importance, and they understand that data is rotting, and they understand that it could all disappear in a fire, right? And so they reached out to us for help. And I don't think any other organization could, well, first of all, have the capital to just move people to Minneapolis for 5 weeks, right? Have the time to donate work for a month, just volunteer labor for a month. And then also just like do so without there being any like payoff to us, right? Just do so because we understand that like getting that data safe and figuring it out later is sort of the priority. And I think most importantly, you know, we might find people who could do all three of those things, but I don't know if they already had the ear of that magazine. You know what I mean? Like me being in the industry and knowing Andy McNamara for like, on and off like 10 years at that point, I don't think anyone else had all of that stuff at once. I don't think that they would have trusted many to come do that. And, we were able to digitize something like, 25 terabytes, I think, of like priceless stuff that they had kept. And, it's, again, and we did that just knowing that like access to that content and stuff is this fuzzy question for the future. Right. But we knew that it's like this, we don't feel safe with all of this stuff not being backed up. So we just stopped everything and did it. And I don't even know theoretically how else that could have come together if not for us and starting this thing the way we did. So, that we tend to focus on projects like that, that we think that only we're capable of arranging. And again, to be clear, I think others are I think others are capable of, getting there, of doing the physical work of solving those kinds of problems. But I don't think that there's anyone else who can do all that and also already has the trust of this institution that was this magazine. So, yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, all of that to just lead up to the fact that because we were there doing nothing but this work for 5 weeks, we had a lot of time to sit down and really think about what it was that was important to the foundation. What are the places that we can be having the most impact and doing the best work? And I feel like we've sort of talked all around this already. I had like, a flow I wanted for this, but we tend to just kind of talk and ramble. So I'll I'll get through this quickly because we actually have, I don't know if you saw, Frank, we have a lot of questions actually.
I did. Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about what I just call like the Barnes Noble bookshelf problem. Where is all the video game history work? If you ever go to Barnes and Noble and you look at the gaming section, there's maybe 2 books that have anything to do with video game history on the shelf. There's usually like Console Wars and maybe Sid Meier's new book or Blood, Sweat, and Pixels or something like that. There's like a couple of books that are actually books about video games. And then everything else is guidebooks and art books.
And again, compare that to be clear, compare that to the movie section or the music section where there are several shelves full of autobiographies and catalogs and things that actually are historical tools or interesting reads, or that go in some level of depth outside of gameplay.
Right. So you see this glaring inconsistency here, and the first question is just like, well, why are there no books about video games? And we came to the conclusion, couple of things, that the tools for researching video games right now suck. As Frank mentioned earlier, if you want to go just read some old video game magazines and get some general context for like what were people talking about in 1992, you just can't. There are not libraries that really maintain these things, or at least not consistently. Like, you might have 1 or 2 random magazines from 1992, but to be able to actually look at a wide breadth of stuff is just impossible. So we want to make it easier for people to become game researchers and talk about these things, because that's the only way it's going to get done, is if you don't have to fly to Rochester, New York, or you don't have to spend 80 hours trying to dig through, random newspaper archives and stuff. We want that to be easier.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning that there are online tools for this sort of thing. There's a lot of magazines digitized at, Retro Mags, on the Internet Archive. There's a ton of this stuff, but it's a craft you have to learn to navigate that stuff. And, I'm not saying that we're necessarily here to solve that, but it does go back to how we were sort of trying to teach people to be historians, because it's a little bit awkward to look for this stuff right now, unless it just kind of happens to come up in like OCR text search or whatever.
Yeah. And magazines is just an example too. We have a ton of we want people to be able to access things like press releases for the games, or um, you know, art that was sent to the media, screenshots that were sent to the media beforehand. Like there needs to be more tools available than just whatever happens to be on RetroMags right now that you can find, you know. Um, so that became the basis of a lot of our talks, that there's not a lot of research out there, and it's because it's very hard to do, and we don't want it to be so hard. So how could we meet that need? The other thing that we realized was important was that you can't save things if they're gone completely. If the floppy disk that something is on is, has completely all the magnetic media is rotted and all of that stuff, I mean, then it's gone. So we need to get the things that are volatile taken care of first. Do you have your disk graveyard behind you by any chance? You can show
I might.
people what some of that looks like. A lot of media is.
Oh yeah, here's one. Hang on, let me look at myself, make sure I can see. Like, yeah, here's a disk where it's becoming delaminated, right? So that data is probably gone. I mean, most of these other ones are actually like, here's a little crack in the CDR, so you can't really access that anymore. What's on here? It's just I think it's just someone's like pirated copy of Knights of the Old Republic or something, so it's fine. And
but the point is,
yeah.
you can't save things, you can't access things if they are completely gone. So we have to physically gather some of these artifacts and digitize the ones that are most volatile. That's an extremely high priority, because if it's in someone's garage and it gets thrown away or it gets moldy or rots and it's just gone, and it doesn't matter, if we have a robust, easy to use catalog yet, because it's gone. So that part is really important. And then
well, when you say that part's really important, do you mean identifying the volatile and targeting it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's part of it, and the physically gathering it too. I mean, we have to actually go out and rescue some of these items, because sometimes they are literally rotting in people's attics or in garages. And the quote unquote bleeding, like it's happening quicker than we can stop it. So we can't, even if we spend all of our time on gathering, we need to also be teaching people why it's important to not force us to be the only ones who are running around and gathering. Not that we are. There's a bunch of other organizations that are doing similar things, but we can't stop the bleeding alone.
Well,
we have to,
organizations can't do it alone. Is I think the more important thing, right? It's like it's got to be a communal effort, and people who have this kind of material or know who might have to be on board, and frankly, they have to feel safe about it as well.
Yeah, and so this isn't just video game companies and people who worked at game companies, although obviously that's a very big part of it. Another big part of it is like video game collectors. We've both been in the game collecting community for a super long time, and I know that they tend to get sort of a bad rap in the preservation community, because there will be situations sometimes where a collector is uncomfortable sharing some of the things that they own, but collectors have found and kept and maintained a lot of these items that would have otherwise rotted or gotten thrown away. And so we need to, this is a whole ecosystem. We have to be working with them rather than against them, antagonistically towards them, because they have saved things themselves. And if we want to get it, through the finish line, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be there in the first place without a lot of those collectors, and so we have to work with them. They find important things, and we want them to also want a good future for those things, and they usually do. And then, there's a lot of stakeholders here. There's academia. There's people who are just the fans of the games, tend to sometimes be the biggest gold mines of good information and of keeping things alive long past when anyone else would have. So we have to kind of gather all of these people in this ecosystem and get them all on the same page. And So that's, I feel like that's kind of like a newer focus for us, but it's one that I think is really important.
Specifically, sort of like getting different stakeholders to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Okay, yeah. It's it's similar to what we talked about with like um consulting with museums and redirecting items and stuff like that. It's like it's something that we've, I think you're right, come to think of it, that we've recently identified that preservation is this ecosystem that involves all of these organizations, and that they don't tend to talk to each other all that well yet. And I think another unique place, again, because we occupy all of these places at least a little bit, I think.
We are trusted in many of these spaces.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like I'm I'm trusted for the most part in the archival world because I've been a part of that forever, but also the game development world, we have a level of trust with them because we can be discreet when they need to, for example, and then we also we have a lot of clout with the collector world, which I don't think there's anyone in the archival world that also has a lot of clout in the collector world other than us. I think that's actually it. I might be wrong about that, but like it tends to be an antagonistic relationship, and I even though it's work sometimes to navigate those two distinct personalities and tie those together. Like in my experience over the last 20 years, it's worth it. It's how a lot of like unreleased games got on the internet, was because I was the diplomatic archivist who also knew the collectors. So yeah, I mean, that stuff's really important. I do want to point out, just while we're still in reflective mode, something that Chris Kohler pointed out in chat, which is a big part of why I started this, which is, I had been doing this work forever, but it was just this guy Frank, right? Like if someone had something, it's like, you should talk to this guy Frank, or like you should give it to Mike Micah to put in his basement, right? And that could only go so far. Just, hey, this guy, I know this guy Frank, so the idea of putting this official sounding name on the work, the Video Game History Foundation, was a way of evolving that and making that feel safer. So thanks for pointing that out, Chris.
Also making sure it lives well beyond you, because we don't want video game preservation to be gone when Frank is gone. We don't want all of the stuff that you've been doing over these past 20 years to be gone just because you are. And so turning it into an institution that's going to outlive us and will involve more people that can continue to grow it as we do. I mean, that's a big part of it too.
So that's sort of reflective. And again, we've always thought of this organization as being very fluid, evolving with the needs of things. I think we're in the best position we've ever been as far as understanding our place in the world and targeting toward it. We're not in the best position in the world to execute on our dreams, and that's purely financial. We're working toward that too. But that's where we are right now. So what does our future look like, right? Like what do we think the future of this organization is right now?
Dylan asked us where do we see ourselves in the next 4 years?
4 years
feels like a real amount of time as opposed to a nebulous future, right?
Okay, have we found the tech bro CEO who gives us $1 million in the next 4 years?
Well, okay.
If so, it's gonna be awesome. But yeah,
we have had a lot of, like, it doesn't sound like an enormous amount of growth just because you guys are hearing that here for the first time Frank is finally taking a paycheck. But in general, I mean, what the revenue we have been bringing in has been growing very steadily, and that's what has allowed us to do things like the Game Informer project, which cost us a very large amount of money to house 6 people for 5 weeks and all kinds of equipment and transportation and all of that sort of thing. Like that was a very big project. So there's been a lot more. We've been able to do a lot more because we've been getting more. Obviously, there is a pretty big jump from Tech Bro giving us millions of dollars from what we have right now. But I think it's safe to say that we are going to continue to be. It'll be an upward trend that will
Yeah.
continue.
Well, okay, so realistically, right? I think a lot of what you've written in these notes that no one can see but us, it's kind of covering in a lot of ways things that I think are accomplishable in the next 4 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
They, at the very yeah.
for example, we do have this notion still of some digital artifacts that we can make accessible that have some level of I don't know what the word would be, but we have things from donors that are like, I want people to use this, but don't just put it on the internet, and that's such an awkward place to be, because it's like you're just kind of holding this thing, and you don't really know, like, do I just, like, people email me? Like, so I do think in the next 4 years there will be some level of, like, limited access to interesting material through a digital repository. Like, we've identified, the vendor that we're pretty sure we want to use, although we haven't committed to it yet. We have some pro bono legal work going on where we're trying to figure out, for some material, like what is required to allow people to get at it, and also protect us at the same time based on the donor's wishes, etc. So I think in the next 4 years, some level of digital access to some cool stuff we can't just throw on the Internet Archive is going to be a thing. I think that
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we've identified, there are things in our collection that I think we've identified as being fairly safe to share.
Oh, there's a lot of that, yeah.
Things that, if a company sends a press release, then that is something that the information contained in that press release is all fair game, right? Because they sent it to an outlet to report on. So publishing the actual press release somewhere is probably not an issue. Obviously, like, source code for a game that came out 3 years ago is a completely different story.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of in between those two things. So there are things that, within the next 4 years, I think it's safe to say. The only thing that's holding those parts back, I shouldn't say the only thing, but the biggest thing that's holding those parts back is just that it costs money to host.
Well, that's a part, but it's also just the cataloging and the digitizing.
Yes,
we have labor costs. Yeah,
we have a process and labor that we have to reconcile with, and that's something that.
Yeah,
I think it's within the next 4 years.
I think so too. It's no secret that we have a lot of things that just need to be digitized that haven't been yet. So that, I think, figuring that out in the next 4 years, I think, is also something that happens. Something else that I think happens, well, fairly positive happens, is that we can start entertaining researchers physically, who are able to get to our office. We are moving to a larger space. I don't know when because of COVID, but we have a space that we're moving into that, it's not big, it's 1,000 square feet, but it's enough where we can sort of put out the things that I think people would access the most, and occasionally entertain people. We can't be a 9 to 5 library just because we don't have staff. I don't think it's the best use of, we do have staff right now. It's me. But I don't think it's the best use of my time to be dedicated to being a librarian. I think there's other stuff that needs to happen. And I don't know, I guess I hadn't really put much thought into, like, a 4-year plan, like goals, right? But I think something that I would strive for is some level of like industry acknowledgement beyond what we have right now, like industry participation in what we're doing. So, it might be recovery. And we've already done a little bit of this. We've recovered material that companies have lost and like given it back to them. But some level of
A
that's
more public version of
more
that.
public facing, exactly. So, for example, there's a commercial product. I think it's called. It's from Digital Eclipse and Disney. I think it's called Disney Classics Collection, Aladdin and Lion King, something like that. That's a project that has a new version of Aladdin on there with bug fixing and stuff like that, and it's like extra features, and that actually used Aladdin source code from our archives, and that's something that we talk about occasionally, but it's not something that like Disney celebrates. You know what I mean? They don't, that's not something that like they're going out there and talking about and shining a spotlight on this organization that helped them. Right. And I'm not saying that in a snippy way. I get it. But like what I'm trying to say is that one of our goals, I think, is to open that door a little wider to like acknowledging that, hey, this is good. Your fans appreciate this. I think that's definitely a goal within the next 4 years, hopefully significantly less than that. But yeah. Should we answer more questions? Where do you want to go from here?
Let's do that.
Okay.
I was just gonna go down the list.
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So Kevin asks, any advice for folks that are interested in making video game history plus preservation a job instead of just a hobby?
Okay, so work in the industry for 15 years, then do volunteer labor for 4 years, and then
marry an engineer
in the Bay Area. Rent control department in Oakland, very important rent control. We have very cheap rent. And
then 4 years
four years later, minimum wage, and you're good to go. So that is our advice. That's what worked for me. But
I mean, in seriousness, like this is a very, very nascent idea. Is the idea of like people paid to preserve video games? If Andrew Borman is still in chat, he might be like the only person I know who is actually paid to do this as a job. There's not a lot of institutions yet that are really allocating good resources for it. We mentioned earlier EA has their own internal archive team. I hope that there are eventually more companies that want to pay for an internal archive team. I think it's going to have to start with the most enormous and profitable of the companies deciding to do that, like the EAs of the world. But I think being a part of this community and continuing to like hone skills in it and learn about the different stakeholders and what's important to them is the way to at least be on track for that when those jobs start butting up. I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I mean, this really is new.
Right. And I think my answer is the same for when people ask me like how to get in the video game industry or how to get into video game journalism. It's like, well, do it and then eventually figure out how to get paid for it is really the only answer. Because if you're, it's not something that you like, it's very rarely a thing you like put in a resume for a job. And when it is, it's, almost entirely like library sciences or something like that, or you're working in a university lab and they happen to have video games or something like that. It's not really a job, unfortunately. So I'll read the next question. It's from our own Simon Carlos. When an old game is made available again on new video game stores, is it ever bad? For example, botched updates, poor emulation, etc. And is that still a net positive anyway? I mean, I do think I do think commercial availability of a game is a form of preservation. It's obviously not one that we do, though we do help with it sometimes. Um, but is it ever bad? I don't know if I can make a judgment call on it, but I do think that sometimes it's. I think often games are misrepresented by their new releases. There's I forget the name of it. There's a Data East arcade game that's a rotary joystick. It's Heavy Barrel, maybe something like that. That when it's re-released, you have to control it with like the shoulder buttons to rotate your guy, and it makes it a completely different and frankly terrible video game to play it that way. So I do think, and this happened with a project that I worked on, SNK 40th anniversary. Same deal, right? When Ikari Warriors, the arcade game, had been released in the past, it just didn't control very well, because people were mapping rotate to the shoulders when in the arcade you could like twist the stick really fast to like rotate. So I do think that it tends to misrepresent games. I think that genuinely people didn't talk about those games, for example, at all, because people's reference for them tended to be these versions that didn't play very well, and I do think that tends to be a net negative for that game. But
Well, I think it's the question is like, is it better to have a game in the incorrect context with no other information, or not have the game at all? Like
sure,
your two options in a lot of these cases tend to be, when they like redo some of these JRPGs and they make all the pixels all weirdly smooth and strange looking, that
ew,
nothing like what the artist intended, and offer no sort of general context or understanding of like why this game might be interesting at all. I mean, you are losing things about that game, but you are at least not losing the game entirely.
yeah.
And to Frank's point, I mean, you might be misrepresenting the game too, but if it's a question between having something done poorly or not done at all, I mean, I can't ever be truly upset that someone is making a commercial product about history, even if it's
It's I think okay. I think it's never a net negative, but I think it's often a missed opportunity.
yes,
I think is my answer.
that's a good way to put it.
I want to skip ahead in our list a little bit.
Go for it.
Because so Born to Be Geek asked, do you have any bigger sponsors? The Patreon money doesn't seem like enough to keep the foundation going. We do. So what we've always said from day one, exactly 4 years ago, is that the Patreon money is really what just kind of keeps the lights on and lets us figure out where real money comes from. So
literally like rent for storage.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the
Like it pays the bills, it pays the office, it pays the storage, it pays whatever. I think we might pay like Adobe a monthly thing for Creative Cloud, or it pays all the bills. And and it also gives us just a little bit extra on top that we sort of put aside for just miscellaneous things that come up. But yeah, we've leveled up our additional revenue, pretty significantly, at least in comparison, over the last year or so. Our biggest donor is actually Limited Run Games. They were very kind and offered us the ability to add donations to the foundation if you're a customer on Limited Run when you're checking out, when you're buying your games. And so that tends to essentially be a second Patreon on average. That seems about right. Yeah.
yeah. Some months are worse, some months are better, but it's the $1 that people just kind of click a checkbox and add to their order add up to about a second Patreon.
Oh my god, we haven't seen the Scott Pilgrim money yet.
Oh god.
Oh my god, that's gonna be huge. The big months tend to be when there's like a classic re-release, right? So Command and Conquer was a big one, for example. Yeah. So that's one. But then I wouldn't say these are sponsors, but we've started doing two things that generate more revenue based on our work. So one of them being the blind box magazines that we've started selling on our store on the website. We started that because we just have a lot of duplicate magazines, like thousands of them, and thought it might be a fun thing to do, right? To get rid of our extra stuff, and do it as sort of a blind box thing, and let people even subscribe. Like they get monthly old magazines in the mail. I was expecting, maybe like 100 subscribers. We have something like 450 monthly subscribers right now. And that the amount of revenue, well, not revenue, I should say the amount of profit, because like most of these magazines were purchased, and there is money that goes into like the Mylar bags and things like that. But the profit on those tends to be, like a third Patreon essentially. So we've now tripled our revenue. And then the other thing that we do contract work for, we haven't really talked about this publicly, not that it's secret, I just haven't found the time to do it, is that we work with a collectibles company called Wata Games. That's WATA. They are the people that you send your like shrink wrapped collectible games to, and they like establish like on a numerical scale, how good of condition it's in, and they put it in like permanent acrylic with like a score on it. This is nothing new in the collectible world. It goes back to comic books and action figures and stuff like that. But they are the primary company that does video games right now. And in addition to grading the condition of things, they also offer a service where they will certify the authenticity of like a prototype or like a game development piece. And they were doing that on their own at first, but we are now actually the exclusive contractor that evaluates that stuff. So when someone submits a prototype to Wata Games, we get a shipment here maybe once a month or so. And the way I worked it out with them was that it would not just be something for them and the owner, but it'd be something that benefits the public as well. So for any game that we evaluate, I dump the data, we digitize it, and compare it to the retail product, see if it's different or not, etc. I write up a report. I think of it as like the Carfax for this prototype, right? Like a report of what it is and whether we suspect it's authentic or not. I have busted a bootlegger. I'm very proud of that. Bootlegger in Mexico City selling fake prototypes. It busted him. And that information, including like if you're technically minded, including the MD5 hash of the data, is now, or will be, because this isn't entirely live yet, will be public information. So, not only is this a source of revenue for us, but it's also a really good win for preservation, I think, because like anything that gets submitted to them is backed up. Like we maintain a copy, they have a copy, whoever owns the thing has a copy, they can access it at any time. So even if it's not shared publicly, like it's way easier to convince someone to share it now because someone has already done the work to digitize the thing. And it's easy to retrieve. But also, and I really like this part, maybe the best of all, is that if one of these comes up on eBay, and people in the preservation community are looking at it, they go look it up and go like, oh, it's final, who cares, and move on with their lives. So that's another source of revenue. And all of that stuff combined is what finally kind of tipped us over the edge into being able to start paying, at least me. And then, hopefully we staff up again from there. We're just kind of right there. We're still figuring that out. But that was a really good question. Thank you for asking.
We've got a couple of other little things too. I mean, we now have a merch
store
that brings us in a little bit every month. We've had a couple. this last year was the first time we ever just actually asked for money, like did a fundraiser and asked people to donate it to it, and that went very well. We're very happy with that. We have done one or two like charity live streams throughout the 4 years, and that's something we're gonna hopefully work with some more people to ramp up more. But yeah, I mean the Patreon, I don't think we ever expect to actually pay anything but the bills, basically, and
Yeah.
not also staff us and pay for equipment and all of those things. I mean, there has to be more.
Yeah, and it's we've positioned ourselves where if everything just gets cut off right now, other than Patreon, we can still exist. We are not. We're very scrappy and we're very frugal, and I mean, it was like getting to the point where I'm paid minimum wage was no joke. It was a struggle to get there, but we think of the Patreon money as just being the lifeblood, right? And like everything else can go, and we could still sort of operate and still be okay with just the Patreon money. And that's and I don't think we're ever going to scale to a point where we risk it all. Like I think we're always going to. It might not just be Patreon. We might have another reliable stream, right? But we're never going to get to a point where we're risking, losing anything. Like we always are operating based on what income is actually reliable, right? So we're not depending on me shipping magazines every month, for example. That's just a nice bonus right now while we figure the rest out. But
right, because we are eventually going to run out of duplicate magazines, I'm sure.
Yes. Okay, you want to read the next one?
Sure. Are we just going back to the
whatever you want to read? I don't care.
All right. Well, I haven't really read. I'm reading all of these for the first time as I'm reading them. So, let's see. So, I want to start with one that, just because I can answer this one quickly. Monty asked, "Have you started cataloging Dev swag? Because I have so many T-shirts." We have a very finite amount of space in that office. However, I now have a storage unit here in Seattle. Foundation's in Emeryville, California. I am in Seattle, and pretty much everything that goes into that storage unit is stuff that I'm sure is going to be a pain to try to figure out later, but it's all that kind of stuff. It's promotional swag and press kits and that sort of thing. So not that I'm saying send me 100 T-shirts, but I mean, we sort of have a place for that.
And to be clear, it's like, we're able to take that stuff and hold on to it, and we might not be its forever home, but we'll make sure that it has a forever home, whether it's us or like, if a museum comes around that's just like super into T-shirts. All right, I'll go next. I'll go to the next one on the list from Daniel Greenberg. With a focus on preserving ephemera, is there a parallel effort to digitizing it, whether via index or actual scans of content? He says, I've been doing reviews on games for PATS, Super Nintendo, and N64 books, and finding scans of manuals can sometimes be elusive. I would love to see a tool in the world that actually catalogs the things that are scanned. I don't think that's our thing. I can't see us doing that. But more importantly, you're asking, is there an effort to digitize ephemera, even if it's just indexing it? This goes back to a lot of what we were talking about earlier. Like it resource wise, we're just so limited that I don't feel like we could do the work we could uniquely do if we were physically scanning things. But that said, we are seeding things out to people who do scan. So for example, part of this Blind Box Magazine program, part of the benefit of it is that it finally forced us to actually go through the duplicates we have. Because up to this point, it was just like, you're a duplicate, you go here, but now we've actually like put all the duplicates in order and stuff like that. And I have gone through and I've gone through every duplicate we have versus looking at what's on Retromags, what's on the Internet Archive, what's on like even private torrent sites and stuff like that. And I started putting aside any magazines that aren't scanned anywhere to my knowledge. And there's like 7 short boxes of magazines, so that's something like 500 magazines, something in that range, that will be sent out to scanners. So again, it's like we're not doing it ourselves, but because of the work we're doing, I'm able to like get things to people who can then put them on the internet. Um, and I mean, like 500 magazines that are specifically unscanned is no joke. Like that's a lot, versus the thousands that are even out there, right? Like to be able to find that many left that aren't scanned, that are just here and I could send for free is a pretty big deal. So I guess that's the long answer. The short answer is that we are doing things that do get scans online. I'm just not physically sitting here scanning magazines.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned specifically manuals. This has not as much to do with the foundation, but I mean, for the groups that are scanning those things, I mean, when the foundation tends to, or when we happen to come across those things, like we have had people just send us random boxes of game boxes and manuals and stuff, and then I own 2 video game stores, so that stuff does still also make it to those groups through those channels. I have a lot of stuff to send out to the good folks at Gaming Alexandria.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that Hubs at Gaming Alexandria, that's all he wants to do. When you talk to him, like that's all he wants to do is scan things and put them on the internet. So we're going to break him very soon. I'm trying to like straddle that line where we don't break Hubs. But we just purchased about 500 more magazines for him to scan. So, it's happening, but those resources are finite, like any resources. So let me see. I want to make sure that we're getting at the good ones here, because we can't do this indefinitely. Okay. Ryuzak, I'm going to pronounce that, says, you guys talked a little bit about redirecting people to the right groups rather than attempting to handle everything yourself. Have you thought about if you might be able to one day establish a public network of game preservation groups that could be helpful for people to find where they could submit things or where they can look for them? So, thought about it, said no. And I'm trying to think of how to word this delicately. It's
all of these groups are made up of human beings and not like long established organizations with very clear rules, guidelines, things in place that make
charters,
it's delicate,
like,
right?
yeah, like it's like we've seen these groups come and go. We've seen people come and go. We've seen people who digitize things as a group, put them online, and then delete all of them because of like internal drama and stuff like that. Like, I'm too old for this. Is what it comes down to. I'm too old to be the glue that's holding like preservation organizations together, especially, because I've just seen so many of them come and go over these last 20 years or whatever. And I've yet to see one end well. Let's put it that way. I've yet to see one just kind of like fizzle out positively. There's always something crazy that happens. And it's not our place in the world, but I'd love for someone else to tackle that.
Well, I know that the new organization Hit Save is doing something along those lines, trying to sort of, if not corral everybody, at least kind of outline who is out there and what they're doing, which I think is a good and important thing, as long as someone is staying on top of it and kind of, keeping it fresh, I guess, because as Frank said, a lot of these organizations do tend to kind of come and go, and that's really like the opposite of what preservation is, right? Like if you don't know if the organization doing the preserving is going to be around. So there are efforts towards that, but I think it's something that we have identified. This community is just not stable enough yet for me to say definitively all of these places are always going to be this, just as they say. I mean, even we're still evolving, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not even, this isn't even like no one else has their shit together yet, right? I mean, it's just that no one in general really does, because we're still,
In these trying times. Yeah.
We're all still figuring this out. So I don't want this to come off in in a negative way, because I do still think it's an important problem to solve. It's difficult for me to say definitively what every one of these organizations is going to look like in 5 years, and therefore if you should just, if in a spreadsheet you can make that judgment call, just based on what you read in a spreadsheet.
It's also just better for my brain to not have to juggle personalities is a big part of it too. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that it's complicated, and it's just not for us. The last one was mine, right? So it's your turn?
Yeah.
Okay.
See.
Oh, actually, I'm going to answer really quick, which is that Dylan asked if this is a VGHF water bottle. It is, in fact, a vintage VGHF water bottle. This is our old logo, so this is highly collectible and off-brand.
Old logo stuff. I probably have some old logo stuff
I think I have stickers. Hang on. I have our old official stickers. Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, I like this question. Why do you think it is that every time there's a new medium, the preservation movement is 30 to 40 years late, and it's nearly impossible to save the early history of that medium? Is it just human tendency, or do you think we can finally learn and not make the same mistakes next time? I'm going to echo something that I was recently talking to Leslie Swan, who was the head of Nintendo's Treehouse for a long time, also worked for Nintendo Power.
More importantly, the voice of Princess Peach in Mario 64.
I don't know if I'd say more important.
That is the most important thing she's ever done, is say, "Dear Mario." That's the height of Leslie Swan's career. Anyway, go.
So I was recently talking with her. She's been, with Nintendo of America, or had been with Nintendo America since the very, very early days. And she basically, I mean, the way she was talking about it was that absolutely nobody at Nintendo thought that this was going to be a real industry with staying power. She said that people literally thought it was just going to be another Atari, meaning it was going to be around for, however long it could last, eight years or so, and then the whole thing would fizzle and it's just a fad. These are just toys. We're just going to ride this train as long as we can, then we're all going to go get different careers because video games will be over again. Because that's just what they are. So, I mean, in the time when these things are being birthed, there's precious few people who really understand that they're on like the forefront of a real long-lasting movement, and not just doing their jobs and going to work and going home at the end of the day and then going to move on to a different career when this is over. So can we learn the next time that we invent a new medium that this is going to be the one that sticks? I don't think so, because every time a new medium comes up, I mean, even something like virtual reality or whatever, I mean, how many of you guys still think virtual reality is a fad? I mean, I do, and someday that's probably going to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I think just as humans, we're kind of always going to struggle with knowing when something is actually the next big thing, and also knowing what to do with it. I mean, even if everyone had been thinking of it from day one, there's probably not a lot they could have been doing with it other than just making a better effort to keep a pile of all of it and take it home and hang on to it for a few years until other people started caring.
And there were a significant amount of pioneers who were doing that in games in
Yeah,
the
for
80s and
sure.
90s. You know, I know people who worked at companies who were like, yeah, I saved all of our source code because no one else was, and I knew it'd be important one day. So, you know, it takes those people to preserve that older material. But I mean, yeah, I mean, Jason Scott just put it the best in the chat. I mean, he just said the word capitalism. That is the reason that a lot of this stuff doesn't get saved. But also, um, you know, there is a nuance to it, and like Kelsey was saying, it's you don't know in the moment that you need to save all this stuff. I mean,
What's going to be important?
well, right, and like you know, something that I've often said is that it wasn't until recently that we even had this notion of when you make a game and you put it on a platform, you should understand that eventually it's going to be on a new platform too. You know, like that's still new. Like our industry's so young that notion that we should be able to sell this game again in 10 years, like that's still kind of a new idea. So you know, it took that, I think, for like the industry as a whole to take it seriously. But I also think that just kind of happened in tandem with things like, you know, the Library of Congress going, oh man, we should be saving video games too. You know, like all of this sort of started happening in the mid aughts at the same time. And I think it's just the nature of a medium like this. All right, let's see. That one's hard. All right, Kelsey. Yeah, I'm going to do the hard one. What area of video game preservation is not getting enough attention today, and what can we do to help? I think, you know, we are in the golden age of finally recording user gameplay as games are new. You know, we are in a world finally where a game launches, and we have live people playing them for the first time. And I don't think there's any effort to capture that. So that is little bit off brand for me to say that instead of like, you know, online virtual spaces that require servers or whatever. But like, that's more on my mind today than that other stuff, because that's something that like anyone can do. Is sort of recognize an important game and start capturing, you know, the sort of day one streams and things like that.
And also the reactions to it. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, obviously, I hope the Internet Archive is around forever. God, what would we do without it? But you know,
Oh my
we'll
God.
have some articles and stuff in theory for people to give you some context of how people are reacting to a current game. But I mean,
But that's not where people are talking anymore,
what if,
you know?
yeah, how are we capturing? Like, do you know how much discourse is happening on Twitter about everything video game related, and just how completely gone that is? Not just in a couple of years, that's gone in like a month. Like,
Yeah.
and no one, as far as I know, no one's like capturing a nice collection of all of the tweets about this and just saving that, you know? So while those might still exist someday, I mean, digging for that's going to be next to impossible. And yeah, I mean, just the way that we are currently interacting with video games, I think, is maybe the biggest issue, because we don't have when we are capturing what the reactions were to games that came out in the 80s and 90s.
We are
All we
finding
really
the
have-
surviving, you know, it's like a dig in an ancient pyramid, and it's like, you know, we have this carving on the wall that suggests that this person was a baker. You know, like that's like the level of what we're able to capture for the 80s. And like we're in a time
that's
where
what we get some magazines that
Yeah.
give us context, so you have what like the game journalists thought, and maybe there's some letters to the editor that you get, you know, the responses to. But we weren't going out onto like playgrounds and shoving microphones in
Right.
children's faces and like interviewing them about these things. So we have just absolute crumbs. And today, we theoretically have the entire feast, everything people are saying right there on the internet through, what they're making YouTube videos about and playing on Twitch and talking about on Twitter and on Discord and stuff. And it is, I mean, it's more ephemeral than ever. Like, it's going to be gone.
Yeah, I mean, and as Jason is pointing out, that tweets are captured. Internet Archive captures tweets, which is great. But I think very specifically what I mean is Twitch streams, just live streams of games, of people playing games for the first time. Like, that is something that I don't think I'm stepping out of line when I reveal that there are at least conversations happening at Twitch about that. Like, they're recognizing the importance of that. I don't know if that means that there's any sort of solution for it, but it is something that's acknowledged. And I think that, I don't know what the solution is, other than, basically like capturing people's streams, like knowing in real time, this is an important game, capture the streams right now. Like, that could be something that someone puts together as a thing to just sort of basically start like pirating people's Twitch streams or whatever. But that's what's on my mind.
We talked about this a little bit on, we did a podcast episode with the YouTuber Summoning Salt, who does really awesome historical research into speedruns and like the history of certain speedruns. And in a lot of cases, the videos of the speedruns, the ones that are like, this is proof that this happened and how it happened, sometimes from as little as like 3 or 4 years ago, are just gone.
Yeah.
Because Twitch doesn't save everything indefinitely, and if it wasn't downloaded and re-uploaded somewhere,
if no one clipped it or whatever,
now, even if they clip it, clips,
clips
I
go
think
away.
Have a finite life, so it's all we have to go off of now of this thing from just a few years ago is just the timestamp and the understanding that there were witnesses to it, so it probably happened. But I mean, there's a lot of problems with modern preservation, but I think that's definitely one I think about a lot.
Oh, I have a good answer to this. What is one obscure video game history fact/story that you learned since creating the foundation that you found amusing? What is that Banjo-Kazooie thing? There was an in-person event for Banjo-Kazooie where they had kids like diving for stuff in a vat of honey, right?
Yeah, I didn't think it was honey, but it was.
Hang
like
on, I wrote this
soda or
down somewhere.
something?
I think it was honey.
Yeah. How would you even do that?
Okay, you keep talking while I
Brown.
find this.
Yeah. There's a lot of really, well, I mean, sort of offshoot of that, just because we found it at the same time that we found this one, was we were made aware of the existence of a cross promotion between Radical Rex and Wiener Schnitzel, where they made Radical Rex Wiener Schnitzel lenticular pogs and gave them out. And so not only did we figure out that was a promotion, we found 4 sets of Radical Rex Wiener Schnitzel promotional pogs, and of course bought them. They live in the Foundation's archive now forever, because those are very important. I do want to
wait. I can read this now.
Okay.
This is from a press release. Children compete to have the chance to be the very first to play Banjo-Kazooie, as well as qualify for a sweet swim in a huge 10 by 15 foot vat of an ooey gooey sticky honey concoction at the Subi Honey Factory to search for all sorts of great prizes, including a grand prize trip to Nintendo in Redmond, Washington. Quote, "What better way to launch an exciting action-adventure game than to have kids enjoy their own adventure in a gooey vat of honey," said Peter Main of Nintendo.
Yeah, I can't think of any better way.
No,
He's right.
that's it. That's it.
I can't think of anything else.
So that
I
event
wanna,
happening and the Wiener Schnitzel Radical Rex lenticular Pog promotion. Yeah, I think those two things are maybe
those are both pretty good.
yes.
Jason Scott in chat brought up an incredibly good point that we should have mentioned with our last question, which is don't put off interviews.
Yeah.
People die, and they also stop remembering the things they worked on 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So if there's any information you need to get out of somebody, there should be more people being interviewed now instead of figuring that part out, 20 years in the future.
Well, and that is something that we mentioned SavePoint earlier, and that's one of their initiatives in addition to like Hit save, sorry. There's only so many terms to use.
I know.
Save game. One of their initiatives, Hit save, right? Hitsave.org. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Hit save, one of their things, in addition to like creating documentation for preserving video game history and sort of uniting communities and stuff like that, is they are doing extensive interviews right now with indie game developers as they're shipping games and doing that live and publishing it. So that is something that they're tackling that I'm very thankful for.
And as Monty pointed out, NoClip is
yes
doing an incredible job of making documentaries about things as they're happening rather than trying to round up people 20 years later and make them dig out their 20-year-old memories. Not that that's obviously you do whatever you have to work with, and all documentaries are probably good just to get original interviews out of, but it's better to do it while it's fresh.
Well, it's also like it's got to be so risky to like wonder if this game's going to be a hit, if anyone's going to watch your documentary that you're doing as you're doing it. I mean, I can't remember the game, but I remember Polygon.com. Russ Pitts had this like 12-part gigantic text tome of like following this developer and flying out every month to talk to them and stuff. And I don't even remember what the game was. It was like something that, just wasn't that big of a hit. And so it's important, but it's risky. And it's like, if you're someone like a NoClip, it's got to be hard to like find that balance of, Jason says at least they didn't call it Cartridge Blow. Yeah, I haven't seen a documentary called Cartridge Blow yet. But every time, okay, pop quiz. What's the name of that Netflix documentary?
High Score.
Is it High Score? You actually know it? Okay, it might.
I think so.
You sure it's not Press Start?
I'm pretty sure, but insert coin.
No, insert coin is a Midway one.
I don't know.
Insert coin's a Midway one. I think it is High Score, the Netflix one. But I always think like Press Start or Extra Credit or something.
Yeah.
It's hard, man.
We have this problem in the video game retail store world too. Everything is a combination of like play and game and trade and it's just different combinations of the same 5 words.
Okay, let's see. Robert R. asks, being based in the Bay Area, have you considered collaborating with or doing an exhibit at the Computer History Museum or any other interdisciplinary museum elsewhere that would be able to get the VGHF more exposure? No, but also, I mean, we actually, okay, let's talk about, we've done some museum exhibits, but they've been pop-up museums. They've been like 2 to 3 day museums at shows. And they've been great, but the thing is like, we're not a museum. Most of our stuff, like we're not in service to, the average citizen, we're not in service to people to walk in and casually observe video game history. We are in service to people who are telling stories. Like that is our audience, right? We're not here for, like mom and dad and the kid to like think about Pac-Man, like we're mostly in service to getting other people to tell those stories for people. So, you know,
Yeah, and I think that's simplifying it a little bit because we, like you said, we have done the pop-up museums, and that's mostly to a it's a somewhere in between. It's like to the collector audience and to the already fan audience. It's not the like third grade field trip to a museum audience, but it's also not it's not only for we don't only service
well, we don't
historians
only,
and
but
storytellers.
I brought that up because we don't have things that are. I mean, we have some, but we don't have a lot of things that are like things you put under glass and they look cool. You know, like what we tend to have are
Yes.
piles of paper and floppy disks and stuff like that, and it's just we're not we're not really well equipped to be a museum display. We have some cool stuff, but it tends to be kind of random. Um, and I don't think that serves us that well. It could be cool, right? But it's when we've done it at Portland Retro Gaming Expo, for example, it's mostly been knowing enough collectors to borrow the cool things and have them
Yeah.
on display. And it's not, and we're good curators of exhibits, but we're not a good archive of things to exhibit. Let's put it that way. All right, what else we got? Your turn. Or it can be mine if you needed to.
Right. We got time for a couple more questions, but on the topic of historical context, I've been thinking about how fan communities and the ephemera they've created, like fan art, games, etc., are important to that context. Do you think there are unique challenges to preserving that part of game history? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that partially goes back to what we were talking about earlier with like Twitch streams and what people are saying on Twitter and that sort of thing is like there's a lot happening outside of a game that is incredibly important to telling that game's story. I mean, just to give a really obvious example, this new Animal Crossing game, like I feel like very little of what makes that game important is within the game itself, and it's more about how people have been sharing that they built a whole area to stage their college graduation inside of the game and then shared it with people and live streamed it to their mom and that sort of thing. Like those are the things that I think are making that game especially impactful in these times, and not just the like running around with animal critters. Is sort of the sharing aspect of that game and the community around it. So yeah, I mean, the National Video Game Museum in the UK has an entire project just based on that one game.
Yeah.
And I think that there's probably hundreds of games that need an entire project like that to truly capture everything that's been going on with it.
Well, and also I
So
feel
yeah,
like a lot of that stuff, if it's not captured, then it okay. A good example would be the Smash Brothers modding community, and I think that's a good example because I think the typical Smash player right now engages with that stuff. They engage with the unofficial online servers and stuff like that for Smash. And I think that if that stuff isn't documented and talked about, then it's no longer a part of that game's canon, and all we have is sort of like the official word from Nintendo. And I think that's very, very wrong for something.
you get like an incorrect history account
Yeah.
after a certain point. I don't know how to answer this question other than yes, it's hard. Like I don't I don't have the solutions I know of are all very long and time consuming. I mean, like what NVM UK is doing, like that is an entire project, an entire institution devoting time for one project for one game. And
Yeah.
I think that there are a lot of big games that deserve that treatment, and probably more of them than can realistically be done.
And all that stuff's happening on Discord, which is not archivable.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. So.
Yeah. Well, there's so many Discords that are like just this one game Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is I can't remember what Steve Lynn, who's on our board and also works for Discord, I asked him once, like, to estimate how many Animal Crossing Discords he thought there were, and it was something like thousands. Like, there are thousands of individual Animal Crossing Discord communities that a lot of them are probably doing something interesting and unique, and
yeah.
I don't want this to be depressing. I feel like we're just...
Okay. I believe that someday there will be a Silicon Valley pioneer who invents the web forums from the 90s and puts a startup name on it, and they'll come back.
I've been thinking about that. I actually think there might be like a weird return to more static internet.
Yeah.
As we get sick of trying to be plugged in all the time.
I don't see it yet. I don't see any whisper of that happening, but I do think at some point there will be a startup that invents the old web forums and doesn't realize that was a thing already, and hopefully it catches on. So let me see, do we have any more? We're out of real questions. Someone did ask if the cake is a lie. I'm not answering that. So I don't know. I guess we should wrap up. We're at 2 hours. We're at exactly 2 hours.
Nice.
You got anything else you want to add, Kelsey?
No, I just I want to thank all of you guys for being here. If you are a part of our Patreon, I mean, you literally keep the lights on here, and we want to hear from you. Like, you are more than welcome to, to talk to us, to email us if you have. I mean, we're a finite resource, but like, I do want to hear from you guys, and I want you guys to all feel like you're part of the conversation here, because you are. You're all a part of actually helping save video game history, and I mean, we honestly just can't thank you enough, because this could not get done without having this level of support as a foundation for us.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, we expressed this already, but the Patreon money, like, that is sort of this immovable, amount of money for the most part, unless everyone decides to stop supporting us at once or whatever. But like, it's
we did so poorly on this stream that everyone's like, I
cancel my Patreon. But I mean, it's not an exaggeration that we, it doesn't pay for everything, but we base everything we can do on where that Patreon amount is. Like, that is like the lifeblood of what we do, and it's not an exaggeration. It's absolutely the truth. So
because Frank and I, at any point, I mean, I'm not paid yet, but he's about to be paid, but I mean, if 2 years from now something catastrophic happens and we need to not be paid for a little while, like, the Patreon is going to keep this thing going, even in like a storm,
Yeah. And it's, another thing too is that, like, I sometimes feel guilty, like we're not producing enough content for patrons, but I think that I'm probably overthinking that in a lot of ways. I think a lot of you are supporting us just because you understand the importance of what we're doing. So, God, I can't thank you enough. So thank you all for your support. Thanks for coming, and we'll do this again sometime, for sure in a year, but maybe something else between. Let's see. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.